Welcome to Concrete Conversations, the Indian Real Estate Podcast. I'm Akshay.
And I'm Yash, and we're the hosts of the show. As the emerging real estate sectors evolve and grow, we see an increasing number of businesses draw inspiration from successful companies in more mature markets.
Our guest today is not only a Navy veteran, but a veteran of real estate as well. Joe Albanese is the founder and CEO of Commodore Builders, a 20-year-old $550 million construction management and general contracting firm located in Waltham, Massachusetts in the USA.
Joe completed his civil engineering from UMass Lowell and his MBA from Boston University and joined the US Navy Civil Engineer Corps early in his career, stayed with them until his retirement in September 2009 at the rank of captain after 28 years of military service. In 2018, Joe was appointed by the Governor of Massachusetts as Chief Recovery Officer, leading disaster recovery and restoration efforts following the September 13th gas line explosions impacting 3 municipalities in Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts.
But what makes Joe such a successful real estate entrepreneur? What does it take to grow a $500 million real estate enterprise? Today, Joe takes us through his journey with Commodore, highlighting key projects, challenges, and experiences that enabled him to weather economic storms and establish a firm that continues to strive for excellence and growth in the years to come.
So without further ado, get ready for some concrete conversations.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Concrete Conversations. How is your Wednesday going so far? It's a Wednesday morning here in Boston.
Oh, it's going well. Just getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday, which is tomorrow.
Right. Well, Joe, before we get started and we dive into the heart of today's conversation, to set the context a little bit for our listeners who will be listening from various countries across the world, could you tell us a little bit about your career? Give us like a short career overview about your work within real estate.
Yes, my career has been in the construction industry primarily. I'm a third generation Italian Sicilian. My grandfather was a construction laborer, and my father spent his career as a civil engineer and construction manager. Mm-hmm. So I was fortunate to grow up in that environment, and also through high school and college, I was able to work with the firm that my father worked for, getting experience in construction, and which was particularly valuable as I was getting my own civil engineering degree in the early 1980s. When I graduated from college, I spent some time in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps on active duty, managing construction projects on naval bases in Europe, mostly in Sicily, and in New Orleans, Louisiana. And then I came back to Boston after my active service and went to work for several construction managers before starting my own firm in 2002. Commodore Builders is my firm, and it's 20 years old this year, and we're about a $550 million commercial construction, vertical construction firm, specializing in life sciences, public school, private school, public work, and commercial construction.
Right. That's fantastic. And congratulations on completing the 20 years. We're going to talk about Commodore Builders in a little bit. But before that, you mentioned that you joined the Navy Civil Engineer Corps. How did your background in civil engineering lead you to joining the Navy Civil Engineer Corps? And could you maybe also tell us a little bit about how civil engineering played a role in your time over there?
Sure. Well, so it was a very personal decision for me. When I was working for the company my father worked for, it was a large company based in Boston, and he was a senior executive there. I realized that he had a big shadow, mm-hmm. and that the industry, while it's a big industry, is relatively small when you look at the players. And I was, Charlie was my dad, and I was Charlie's son. And so I felt like, it wasn't like it was his own company. It was a company he was still working on his career. And I had been approached by the Navy to join the Navy Civil Engineer Corps and get some different experience. And I thought that would be good for me to get out of town, separate from Boston, and get some different experiences and grow and continue to grow outside of the industry that my father was such a key player in at that point in time. I got out of the Navy and came back and worked for a different company. But in 1993, almost 10 years after I graduated from college, I went to work for the company my father worked for again. But this time I felt like I had my own credibility, my own reputation, and I wouldn't be living with the appearance that my success was due to the fact that I was Charlie's son.
Right. And if possible, you said you were constructing Navy bases. Could you tell us a little bit about what that really entailed from a civil engineer's perspective?
Sure. Well, the Navy Civil Engineer Corps is a very diverse group within the Navy that really manages all of the naval installations, in a public works type role. And it builds and constructs new buildings and improvements to naval bases. And there's also another function that the Navy Civil Engineer Corps staffs, and that's the Naval Construction Forces, and that's combat construction. My active duty time was primarily in the Navy Civil Engineer Corps construction management arm, and my first 2 years of duty with them was in Sicily. And if you remember in history, in the mid 80s, there's a lot going on in the Middle East, as there is today, and there was a huge buildup in Sicily as an interim stepping point to access the Middle East. And so really they called at that time the base in Sicily the hub of the Mediterranean, and they spent a significant amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, improving the base, improving the airfields, building air operations facilities, building barracks and other base housing, and other support buildings, hospitals, classrooms for the students of dependents that were there,
Right.
and office buildings. So it was just really building a small city on a base.
Right. And that's quite a unique set of experience to have from a civil engineering and construction perspective. So are there any things that you feel that, from your experience with the Navy Civil Engineer Corps that translated into your role and your work now at Commodore Builders?
Absolutely. There were a lot of technical things, just learning more about construction, managing multiple projects,
Right.
planning around operations, planning around contingencies, and coordinating, people and commands and organizations with sometimes conflicting interests. So I learned a lot about logistics in the industry, but I also learned a lot about leadership because of my role in the military, and really how to motivate people and how to really work towards a mission that was defined and align people around it.
Right. And when you talk about that, are there any, specific skills or specific takeaways that you had when you were working with the Navy?
Well, very, very much so. Very much so. We talk about the fact that I spent my 4 years on active duty, but I spent 24 years after that in the Reserve Naval Construction Forces. And
Right.
The Naval Construction Forces, they're a very integrated group of reserve and active duty resources. In fact, 2/3 of the Naval Construction Forces are reserve officers and enlisted folks, Seabees. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Seabees, but and they scale up in wartime and they scale down in peacetime. So the numbers
Right.
of that organization are smaller now. But through that period of time, when I was both in the industry and working in the Navy, I learned an awful lot about, again, managing people, leading people. I learned really a lot about really developing a bigger picture aperture, balancing both my military career and my civilian career. Most importantly, keeping the long view, being, understanding how to lead with purpose. Purpose is important in anything that you do, but the tenet of commander's intent in the military really relies around, defining the purpose, then defining the method, and then defining the end state, so that with clarity, the people that you're aligning around a mission understand, what the goals are and are aligned in the end point.
Right.
Those were really important principles that have founded the culture and the strategies that we employ here at Commodore Builders, and have really contributed to our success over some very meaningful times. And I'll give you a couple examples. And one example is the Great Recession that we endured in 2009, 10, 11, and 12. And, my ability to be confident enough in keeping the long view through some very challenging times allowed me to really communicate with our people and to help them to see how we were going to get through a very, very tough economy and some real business challenges when other people, I don't think, were leaning forward in the same way. So we actually were able to advance the ball during that recession and position ourselves for some great growth and success coming out of the recession. There were also, leading through COVID, over-communicating to our people so that nobody that worked at Commodore Builders was in the dark relative to what we were doing, what was important, taking advantage of some shutdowns and employing, 5,000 hours of training in a time when construction was shut down for 2 or 3 months, and working on company initiatives and business planning and taking advantage of that. And those were really things that I learned, when I was on the board of directors of the Naval Construction Forces and working around some very smart and talented people that really helped to shape my own ability to see a bigger picture.
That's fantastic. And I think you've really clearly illustrated this for us with some really key examples. You talked about having the big picture when you're leading an organization or a team. You talked about communication, and sort of stepping forward in your journey here. I wanted to ask you, what do you think the importance of communication is in both as someone who is an employee of an organization, someone who is a member of a team with strong hierarchical structure, and also someone who is leading an organization? And maybe if you could give us a few examples to illustrate what you're saying, that would be great.
Well, I talked a little bit about purpose.
Right.
Purpose is very important to keep people motivated. I mean, not only what are you doing, but why are you doing it? And why is it important? Why is it important to the bigger entity? Why is it important to the universe? Why is it important to you? Or should it be important to you? Or are there other things that are important to you? Communicating to people as we work through their career progression, so they understand, what are the skill sets and things that they need from a training and experience perspective, so that they feel like they're getting real progress in their career and that they can really see benefit to staying with the organization. I mean, retention of employees really depends upon us being open and giving them a sense that we care, that we're tracking and really helping them advance their career and maximize their opportunities with our organization.
Right. Perfect. Now that we covered the kind of your journey and the experience of transitioning through these different roles through your career, I wanted to ask you something about, the breadth of real estate experience that you have when it comes to construction. So as you said, when you worked with the Navy Civil Engineer Corps, it was like building small cities. So with that in mind, in all your years of experience with Commodore Builders as well, are there any marquee projects that you remembered through your career, or any projects that stood out to you?
Well, one project which ended up not really being a Commodore project was because I actually took a leave of absence from Commodore to implement it. In 2018, the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts, the city of Lawrence and the towns of Andover, North Andover, experienced a horrific gas explosion, which compromised more than 10,000 buildings and residences, and caused hundreds of fires and actually one fatality and many injuries. But in the month of September, early September, mid-September, put that region out of business from a natural gas perspective, and required a significant repair of all gas lines, more than 50 miles of gas line in the street.
Wow.
And 10,000 services to 10,000 buildings and appliances in those buildings, which included boilers and hot water heaters, gas, clothes dryers, and stoves. So literally, people couldn't heat their homes, heat their water, cook their food, or dry their clothes. And the governor of Massachusetts appointed me to be the chief recovery officer for that. So I left Commodore Builders for about 12 weeks I pulled in 2 retired Navy admirals and 4 retired Navy captains to help me with this. And we built a team of 5,000 people, including contractors, including tradespeople, including more than 1,000, actually 1,100 plumbers.
Wow.
Putting $750 million worth of work in place in 12 weeks to get that region back into their homes by the end of November, early December, so that with the winter season they had heat, they had hot water, the ability to cook, and to live in their homes. So that for me was really the confluence of all that I learned in the Navy. In the Navy, I learned things about disaster recovery, contingency engineering, command operations centers, command control communications, preparing for war. And I also learned a lot about large scale construction and how to build teams and motivate teams. And we were able to put that to work along with my commercial construction experience and my relationships in the region with contractors and with vendors and with other resources that we were able to bring to bear to really respond to this horrific scenario and get people back home. In fact, I was in Lawrence, Massachusetts this morning for a meeting and was reminded of how far they've come and really what our team accomplished with under some very, very trying circumstances.
That's fantastic. I laud you for the achievement on managing to do this, because we know, Yash and I know that from our experience in real estate, that a project of this scale typically would take a lot of time, and you were able to turn this around in such a quick time frame and get people back into their homes. One of the things that you mentioned was keeping people motivated, and you did touch upon this a little earlier as well. Could you illustrate for us some of the things that you all did while leading the team to actually ensure that you were able to meet timelines or maybe even beat timelines in order to rehabilitate the houses for people to be able to move back in?
Well, so we were involved in the recovery of a situation that none of us really had direct experience with, in a place where people were upset, displaced, angry, where the media and the political environment was complicated because they wanted to hold the utility company accountable. And so there was a lot of negativity, a lot of, the citizens and the residents were displaced and upset. And so, we held several town meetings, which were really, really important. We'd go to the town halls and the city hall. The first one we held, was very adverse. And the people, I mean, I described it as them coming into the room with pitchforks. So they wanted a little bit of all of our hide, even though we were there to fix it.
Right.
Yeah. But we listened and we communicated with them, and we told them what we were trying to do and our plan. And we again spent so much time in the media, on social media, and on the news, and in person, just trying to articulate our plan so people understood it. And it wasn't easy. And so when we were falling a little bit behind schedule and had to pivot and put other things in place, get more plumbers, find more people, expedite materials, we in turn were talking to our teams of people that were working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week, to keep them motivated, to really get them to understand the purpose of what they were doing and how important it was, and the successes, despite the fact that they were getting, crucified by the news and the media. Right. So it was a real exercise in that.
And sorry, if I may jump in real quick, what was the total size of the team you were managing? How many people was it?
Well, the Command Operations Center, our command team was about 250 people. Okay. But the whole team, including all the contractors and all of the workers, was more than 5,000.
Wow, that's huge. And just in contrast, if you don't mind me asking, what is the number of people that you manage at Commodore?
Well, Commodore's about 220 employees at Commodore Builders. Plus, we have another labor and equipment company with about 180, 190 laborers and carpenters. So all in, we've got about 400 people.
That's fantastic. Fantastic.
Wow. Right. And Joe, if I could just ask you a small follow-up. We talked about the kind of working with people, and especially in a high-pressure situation like this. But when it comes to real estate and executing large projects, whether it's in the public sphere, like the one we're speaking about now, or even in the private sphere with Commodore builders, what is the importance of having set systems? Does it help make things smoother, or is it impossible to do projects of this scale without having ironclad systems?
Well, processes and procedures are important. Putting systems in place and KPIs to measure what's important, to track, where you're succeeding, where you need to do better is important. Otherwise, you could just be going through all the motions and really not understand, are there efficiencies, inefficiencies? Can we build on this? Can we make it better? Can we improve? Processes and procedures are also important from a safety perspective.
Right.
And construction is inherently a risky business. I sometimes think that construction managers are more risk managers than construction managers because there are so many risks as it relates to the work, safety, supply chain, schedules. I think over the last 5 years, since I left the Merrimack Valley, one of the things I've been doing more and more of at Commodore Builders is really data analytics. And I learned a lot about that in the Merrimack Valley because of the team that we had and the sophistication of that team. Mm-hmm. And I see that in construction, measuring and reporting on data really helps us improve our performance. And it helps us understand where the weak links are relative to our processes. Where if we're not achieving what we need to achieve, where is the risk, and how do we make sure that we attack that risk at the right spot so that we can improve the whole process.
Right. And Joe, taking a step back here, and this is something that obviously you talk about this, and it's evident that your passion for real estate and your passion for doing these projects. What I was curious to ask you was about your passion as an entrepreneur. Could you tell us a little bit about why you decided to take a step away from a professional career and start your own business at Commodore Builders?
Well, it's funny. I've just out of habit have this check-in with myself every decade. I did it when I turned 30. Mm-hmm. I did it when I turned 40, and I just did it this past summer when I turned 60. But I was about to turn 40 years old. I was working for a good company, but I also, looked at that company, looked where I was, looked who I was working with, looked at what their values were, and what my potential was with them, and I also looked at the age of my children, and knew that my oldest was 11 years old at the time, and I felt like there was a window closing in my life that if I didn't try to do something entrepreneurial at that point in time, then I probably wouldn't get an opportunity to do that and still, be able to get my kids to college. So it was really a timing thing for me. And I felt like it was now or never. And that was 2002. And I never looked back. I think entrepreneurs, not everybody can be one. I think that's something that, something that I think I was born with, that desire to lead, to do what I wanted to do, and I was very, very lucky with the training I had between the Navy and the regimentation and organizational skills I learned at the Navy and discipline, and the experience I had through my dad and the work I did with his business and the work I did for some other companies, that I think it was really well positioned at that point in time 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. to start a business and to thrive, and we did. We did $7 million worth of work our first year, 28 million our second year and 50 million our third year. So we grew very, very quickly. If not for the recession in 2009, 10, 11, 12, I think that we would have grown even more quickly. But we're, here we are at year 20, $550 million. I'm proud of that, and more proud of the talent that we attract now, and the people that are making their own careers and building their lives around, what they're accomplishing here at Commodore Builders.
Right. Perfect. And I think that sort of, sets us up for a segue now to more industry-related questions. We wanted to get your opinion on a few sort of topical issues that we see in the housing market and the real estate market in the USA. Given the uncertainty we've seen in the overall housing market in the US, how do you feel developers are adjusting to the current market conditions?
Well, first of all, it's very complicated because, when you reason through the equation, the math here, interest rates are double what they were.
Right.
Okay, so that means the cost, to finance the work is significantly more, which means that you either need to lower your costs someplace else, cost of construction, or charge significantly more money for the product in order to make a profit. And the forces are against that right now because construction costs and supplies and labor, it seems like a runaway train right now. I mean, it's the escalation that we've endured over the last 3 or 4 years has made commercial construction, including housing, very complicated to finance and to make any pro forma work. And so we see, 2 years ago, there was a big movement in commercial construction to have commercial developers develop lab space because the economy of lab space is a little different. You can get premium revenue from life sciences providers because of the the origin of their profits and how they can spend significantly more money on a per square foot basis. You see office buildings now where tenants are cutting their space significantly to reduce their office requirements because of the cost and also because of the model right now of the workforce where people are working more remotely.
Right.
And they don't need the space. So, there's a lot going on here that still needs to correct itself. And so I don't think that you're going to see the right balance right now, particularly in residential development, until the interest rate / cost of construction and sale price really are balanced, and they're out of balance right now.
Right. And just continuing on from what you just mentioned, given that I'm currently sitting in India and emerging markets were used to a much higher cost of borrowing, but given the quite steep hike in interest rates in the US, how systemic is this for the benefit of our listeners? Would you mind explaining the kind of transmission mechanism or the knock-on effects of a high interest rate when it comes to real estate and construction?
Well, the high interest rate here clearly is an effort, to stem inflation.
Right.
Clearly the Federal Reserve is, that bank is trying to slow things down, to ward off inflation. But that's to me more a function of right now what the federal government has done with all of the money that they've spent, through COVID, a lot of which I think was, it could be classified as irresponsible, giving money away to really mask the real effects of the economy through that time.
Right.
I think we're headed to a correction, and it's going to be a correction that I think is going to be painful for some people and for some companies. We're bracing ourselves in the construction industry because we are a leading indicator of economic shifts like this. And so once we get through that, I think that we'll be back to a healthy recovery and a place where development will be back driving a strong economy.
That's perfect. Moving on to a slightly different topic, though, within the construction industry. Do you feel that there have been any recent advancements in construction technology that you think will change the course of the real estate industry over the next few years?
Well, I do. First of all, I mentioned data analytics and how that for me can improve the efficiencies in construction you're still really developing other technology like building information modeling
Right.
and virtual realization of VDC and our ability to really build things on paper and spend more productive time planning so that the actual construction process is smoother. There are many advances in project management and project management applications that help us, really keep track of things and ensure that, that communication across the team is more and more open and information is available. And that was tested through COVID. We had projects where we, all of a sudden stopped having on-site project meetings because it wasn't a risk. And so with a lot of the technology that we had, from video, realization to just plain old Zoom, I mean, we were able to really bring clients and architects and designers and inspectors virtually onto the project site to answer questions, solve problems, and get work done, even though people couldn't be in the same room. There's a lot of building material advances, and I think there'll be more of that, particularly as, I think that the United States right now is making a real effort with the, Build America, Buy America Act to get more built in America capacity. And I think that with that will be more state-of-the-art facilities that will be able to build more advanced building materials. A lot more off-site construction, panelization, prefab, so that whole systems are being brought onto site and installed with much less on-site labor. I mentioned safety earlier. There's some big advances in safety and protective equipment for people. And safety, has always has been important, but today is just paramount, particularly with all of the challenges that were presented to us during COVID. And I think that's one of the reasons why the construction industry was a leader coming out of COVID, because some of the COVID safety protocols that we were able to put in place, we were able to put in place much more rapidly because of our pre-existing focus on safety.
Right.
A lot is still sustainability, green building. There's a lot going on with that in the construction industry. And I think that we'll see a lot more of that in the future, particularly because construction and the construction process is such a big part of the measurable carbon footprint of society. So I think we have an obligation to improve that, not just in the construction process, but also in the sustainability of the things that we leave behind.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Joe, as we're nearing the end of our conversation, our time here today, I wanted to dial it back to something you mentioned at the very start of the conversation. You talked about the importance of maintaining a vision of the big picture, keeping your eye focused on the larger goal and the larger objective. And when we spoke last, you mentioned that one of Commodore's objectives is to grow from a $500 million company to $1 billion company. With this in mind, I thought we could ask you, where do you feel the growth opportunities lie for Commodore builders going into the near future?
Well, so we put our 5-year strategic plan in place a couple of years back. We were less than a $300 million company then. We're at 550 now. And our goal for 2026 was 800 million. I mentioned to you $1 billion because I'm focused on that right now in my role as CEO. I made our COO president back in March, and I'm CEO, and my focus has changed a little bit. He's much more operational, and I'm much more focused on our infrastructure, building our infrastructure so that we can scale. The thing about our business is, you really need that support, that foundation, in order to continue to grow. So, we've spent a lot of money and time over the last 3 years building Commodore Academy, which is a real institutionalized training program to make sure that our people are trained and more capable, and that we have really defined the Commodore way from a building better builders perspective, to technology, to leadership and soft skills. We call those power skills. Also, making sure we make the right investments in our engineering, BIM, VDC, and pre-construction planning. We find over the years, we found that when a project doesn't go well, it usually translates back to the plan wasn't a good plan. So we've made big investments over the last several years in our planning department and our planning process. So our planners, our schedulers, our quality control people are really, again, building it on paper and communicating and seeking out where the risks are and how we address those risks going forward. We're not growing to 800 million and $1 billion just for the sake of growing, but we're growing to make sure that we can continue to create opportunities for the people that have entrusted their careers to Commodore builders, so that they can see that they have a place to go and to achieve what they personally want to achieve, without feeling that they have to leave to go someplace else. So we have entrepreneurial positions within Commodore that they lead divisions, which are really companies within a company, so that we have a place for that entrepreneur at Commodore Builders that's a proven operator that has fire in his or her belly, that wants to lead something, and we'll give them the platform to do that within the company that we have here. So really, growing right now isn't for the sake of growing, it's for the sake of creating opportunity for our people.
Right. Perfect. And, going forward, I hope that we can see Commodore builders realize this vision into the future. With that, Joe, I just wanted to say thank you for taking out the time to join us and for sharing with us your journey and your insights when it comes to construction, civil engineering, real estate, entrepreneurship. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both, and actually, enjoy the rest of your time at Boston University. And
Thank you.
I hope to see you both sometime in the future.
Thank you, and likewise.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow Concrete Conversations on Instagram to know more about upcoming episodes and for some behind-the-scenes content.
For more deep dives into the world of Indian real estate, stay tuned for more Concrete Conversations.